Oh, you've already asked a question.
There's one comment.
Okay.
Very much about, and I think you like this. Is Kim Hill was interviewing on the weekend.
Sorry, who?
Kim Hill was doing an interview with this guy who's about addictions, and the guy said you have to act your way into right thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is.
Thanks. Right on. Contribution, yes.
I will say straight out that I come from a Theravada perspective, as a born-again Theravada practitioner, whereas my wife is born and bred Theravada.
Oh, right, okay.
I was just really interested in, I've looked at some of your YouTube stuff and I've done some reading, and having grown up in Christian churches, I have to say that some of the stuff you're doing does sound a lot like wordsmithing and labeling things, and I don't like that, because, you know, like when I used to go to Christian churches, I liked the full sang evensong, you know. I didn't like, you know, modern songs and that sort of thing. So I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I think that there's a wonderful, rich culture in Buddhism which is beautiful and heartfelt and a very lovely thing to become part of. So I'd kind of be really sad if we started calling it operating systems and, you know, interfaces and stuff like that. I think you'd lose the joy a lot. But in regard to the question, was in a lot of your the things I've seen on YouTube, etc., you appear to renounce the concept of rebirth. And I just wanted to ask you about that, because that is a fairly core concept to me in Buddhism. So just ask.
Thank you very much. I was kind of expecting that question. Okay, can I just make some reflections on your opening remarks? In terms of my sense of being a participant in an emerging Buddhist community, I recognise that, you know, each of us in that community, you know, has a particular role and maybe a particular gift to offer. And I'm kind of the house intellectual, if you want. That's what I do, and I think I'm reasonably good at it. So that's my role. It would be a great mistake for me to say, everyone should do it like this. I'm not suggesting that at all. If I were a Christian, I'd be a theologian. I mean, obviously, that's just how I'm wired, and everyone is wired in their own particular way, and the practice surely is to create a community in which that sort of diversity can flourish. The other point is that I actually am quite traditional, maybe more traditional than you might think. One of the practices that I deeply enjoy is that of pilgrimage. I take people pretty much every year to India, and we go to the sites where the Buddha taught, we circumambulate the stupas, we, in a sense, sit in a... And the reason I like it is because I can't conceptualize it. I enjoy being in these physical spaces where I have the memory of these great teachers and monks and tradition having been formed, and simply allowing myself quietly to participate in that. I love going to Bodh Gaya, which is you may have been there, I don't know, where the Buddha attained his awakening. And one of the greatest joys in my practice is to circumambulate that stupa in the company of Buddhists from all over the world. That I feel at those moments that I'm part of something far greater than what I might personally be interested in Buddhist modernity or something. All of that I let go of. And I find myself as part of a human, basically, literally, a human movement around a stupa. So, and next year I'm taking a trip to the old Buddhist monasteries that have survived in India. So I'm not as two-dimensional as I look. Now, rebirth, obviously, is a central belief within all forms of Orthodox Buddhism. I would be the last person to dispute that. And it is, of course, also central in the Zen tradition. In fact, in the Zen monastery where I lived in Korea, part of the function of the monks was to perform death ceremonies for 49 days, as one does in the Tibetan tradition. As a social and cultural institution, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, is very much involved with the rites of passage and the giving context for bereavement and hope for those who have suffered loss. And those elements, I do think, are quite clearly an integral part of the whole practice. But I do have difficulties in taking the doctrine of rebirth literally. I find, for philosophical reasons, for empirical reasons, and also, actually, in terms of my understanding of some of the earliest texts, that rebirth is simply a doctrine that I find doesn't work anymore for many people. I think it's a metaphysical in the sense that it's not something I think we'll ever be able to, definitively prove or disprove. And I think also in our, in traditional Buddhist societies, it's important to recognize that rebirth is not just a doctrine, but it is actually has a very important social function in providing explanations for things that otherwise are inexplicable. To be able to understand why it is that you have a child who is suffering from some terrible disease, it gives you a way to explain why that's the case. Likewise with a very gifted child. And it gives you a sense of hope into a future that will enable you to aspire to realize those things that perhaps in this life you cannot. But I feel in modernity, those functions are largely taken over now by our sense of history, our sense of how we have evolved as beings through natural selection, and also how, in terms of the future, I feel that the urgency of our situation, which was not the case in traditional Buddhist societies, really has to be in the future of this earth and this planet. I feel that the focus needs to shift away from what may or may not occur to me in some future existence, but how, through my acts here and now, I can help contribute to a world that is less preoccupied with consumption, with pollution, with the destruction of environments, with the extinction of species. That is the future to which I seek to work towards. So I don't, rebirth, reincarnation, I find doesn't work for me. I find it's fairly, as an idea, it's fairly incoherent. But I don't in any respect reject the idea that my actions will have effects after my death. But the effectiveness of those actions, I would focus entirely upon the sort of world that I leave behind when I die.
So you're an instant karma guy.
No, not an instant karma guy.
You've
Not
read
at all.
this question millions of times too. What about Ian Stevenson's?
Sorry? Ian Stevenson's work. Ian Stevenson was a professor at, he's no longer alive.
No.
Ian Stevenson was a professor at the University of Virginia who did a lot of work on studying young children, primarily from Sri Lanka and Asian countries, who had very clear recall of experiences in past lives. And that, I think, is the way to go. I think if we're going to explore the phenomenon of rebirth, we need to do so empirically. And I think Stevenson's work is a very good step in that direction. But, and again, we could go on a long time about this, I don't find it sufficiently compelling to be able to draw the conclusion that therefore all of us will be reborn according to our acts. I think it provides a certain, a very, in some cases, a very compelling piece of evidence that is highly suggestive of rebirth, which is the phrase that Stevenson used. He said it's suggestive of. And rebirth, therefore, is a hypothesis that would appear to explain these phenomena.
Can I ask a question supplementary?
Well, is there anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet? Yes, this gentleman here.
This rebirth you are talking about.
Rebirth, did you say?
Yeah. Don't you think to have that faith in that? I mean, instead of talking it is metaphysical and all that type of stuff. By having that faith on that, you start conducting yourself nicely.
Nicely?
Nicely in the proper way. And when you are thinking, my actions are going to have something in the after this thing. If you have that feeling, you try to conduct yourself.
Well, you see, I believe that. Of course I do. I think that moral and social responsibility is very much grounded in an understanding that the actions that I commit now, in my thoughts and my words and my deeds, will have consequences after my death. But I don't feel that it's necessary to also believe that I'll be around to experience them.
But that is true in the sense, whatever you spoke just now, all these 1.5 hours, there's nothing absolute truth. It's all metaphysical mostly.
Yeah, but you see, I think, well...
If there's a truth, and you're
Sorry?
saying it has to be verifiable, or else it doesn't exist.
No, I didn't say there's a truth that has to be verifiable, but whether or not children are reborn, that is something we can look into empirically. But I don't think we need to use the word truth.
But you're saying it's the ultimate truth.
No, I'm not saying it's the ultimate
truth. Karma, you're rejecting rebirth.
No, you didn't listen to me. I did not say that I rejected the fact of karma. I quite clearly just said that, and you didn't hear it. I'm sorry. I qualified it, but I qualified it in a way that I find is as adequate as in the theory of rebirth. Rebirth for me is pure metaphysics. I'm sorry. There is some evidence, but it's very limited, and it is not sufficient upon which to draw conclusions of, that we will therefore all be reborn according to our acts. Surely the crucial thing is to seek to live a life here and now in which we respond as authentically as we can to the condition of suffering in this world. If we live that way, then if there is rebirth, I can think of no better way to prepare for it. If there is no rebirth, then I've lived my life to the best and quality I can here and now. We therefore have a win-win situation.
More sociological question. I'm concerned with the ecological crisis of modern civilization, and I wonder if you could comment whether the relational thinking that is in Buddhism and in Buddhist societies could help, and whether there are strands in other faith societies that could be useful here.
Well, I do feel that Buddhist philosophy is, in a sense, ecological, in the sense that there is it's a non-essentialist form of thinking. In other words, it recognizes that whatever exists does so not because it has some essential nature of its own, but because it has been formed by the relationships with other conditions, with causes and circumstances that have given rise to it. There's a very strong emphasis in Buddhism on understanding cause and effect. And the more that we internalize that kind of worldview, the more I would hope that we would become more aware of the consequences of our consumerist behavior, for example. But I feel very strongly that without really interiorizing that kind of vision of the interconnectedness of all life and our own responsibility as agents within that interconnected matrix, that is the basis upon which any real change will begin, that perhaps leads us individually and socially to a way of life grounded again perhaps on the values of simplicity, of contentment, that again are very deeply part of Buddhist tradition, that might offer some hope to subsequent generations who will have to live with the consequences of our greed. And I think that's a good point. Yes, quick.
What is the difference between rebirth, incarnation, reincarnation?
Well, there is no distinctive... In Buddhism, there is simply one term, punnabhava in Pali, and it could be translated as reincarnation, it could be translated as rebirth. Sometimes in the West, reincarnation refers to the Hindu idea of the reincarnation of the soul, whereas rebirth refers to the continued becoming of life of a non-permanent soul. But that's an imposition of Western ideas on a doctrine for which there is only a single concept in classical Buddhist language.
But Mahayana texts would be very different.
They would they?
Yes, they would.
Which one, for example?
The Mahayana text of Bodhisattva incarnation, whether you call it a rebirth or reincarnation.
Well, we have to stop in a minute, but the difference is that the Bodhisattva is one who refuses to enter Nibbana in order to consciously take birth in other forms out of compassion for the suffering of the world, which is a very, very beautiful idea, a very wonderful paradigm within which to seek to live one's life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lloyd Geering has arrived and would like to just say a few words, but before we all go, thank you very much, Stephen, for coming. I'm sure for a lot of people here the earth has moved. We have shaken your foundations, and please do come back again, and we will have other events during the course of the year about shaking the foundations. On your way out, you'll be confronted by someone holding a donation box. Please be generous. Tonight's donations will go entirely to the St Andrew's Trust. Stephen has said he doesn't want anything from us tonight, which I think is very generous of him. Please have a look at his website. His notes tonight, by the way, are available at the back in printed form. And on the other side, you'll see a link to his website. If you do want to support Stephen, on his website you can make a donation there. So we won't go leave New Zealand completely empty-handed. And I'd just like to welcome Lloyd Geering to come and say a few words in greeting. You may have known that Lloyd and Stephen had a dialogue.
Coming on my knees in humble apology for the fact that in my diary I had put it down at 7 o'clock. And when I was rung up about 25 to 7, I said, I'm on my way, and he said, it's already started. So, my great humble apologies, Stephen. I was looking forward to hearing you. I've heard most of it except that with my disability, I lisp quite a bit nowadays. What I heard was excellent. And it's a great delight for me to be associated with Stephen from time to time, because I feel he's a soulmate, and that he is within and from the Buddhist tradition doing almost exactly the same as what I have been trying to do within the Christian tradition. Which is to draw from that tradition, but in a way which is completely relevant to the world in which we live. And both of us emphasize the fact that what our traditions primarily are intended to do, and have done in the past in their own way, is to help us to be completely human. Thank you very much.